although, truth be told, newspaper reporters have slightly better manners. For secular fundamentalists, religion in general, and the Bible in particular, are not just wrong-headed, but actually dangerous. That's because religion and the Bible stand in the way of everything they value most in life. Primarily unlimited sex, of course, but also the power to reshape society into a kind of secular utopia free from traditional ethical restraint. The sudden eruption of Islamic terrorism worldwide has given secular fundamentalists the excuse they've long needed to basically draw a circle around all religious belief, from the Taliban to the World Council of Churches to the Dalai Lama, and insist that, well, it's all the same thing. In principle, they imply, Mother Teresa was no different from Osama bin Laden. Only her methods differed. Thus, former New Republic editor Andrew Sullivan, a disgruntled Catholic upset that the Vatican won't declare homosexuality just another lifestyle choice, now writes routinely of Christianist organizations and figures. Drawing a parallel with Islamist figures who advocate mass suicide bombings, these menacing Christianist figures, Sullivan says, are now scheming to impose a kind of Christian theocracy on the enlightened secular societies of the West. Those who object to partial birth abortion, for example, or to the creation of animal-human embryos in laboratory experiments, are no different from Islamic terrorist groups. As the anti-religion crusader Sam Harris put it, those opposed to therapeutic stem cell research on religious grounds constitute the biological and ethical equivalent of a flat earth society. Harris, the author of the 2005 bestseller and National Book Award-winning The End of Faith, and most recently, Letter to a Christian Nation, is merely one of a number of widely celebrated writers to warn the world about the growing menace of religious convictions. According to his biography, Harris is a graduate in philosophy from Stanford University, who is currently pursuing a doctorate in neuroscience at UCLA. The stated purpose of his book is not to describe an actual social reality, the end of faith, but rather to issue a call to arms to secular fundamentalists everywhere to drive religious persons of all persuasions out of the public sphere altogether. Harris openly and proudly insists that what the world needs now is intolerance, not tolerance. He reminds the educated reader of the old menacing claim by the 18th century philosophe Denis Diderot that men will never be free until the last king is strangled in the entrails of the last priest. Or, in Harris's own words, to speak plainly and truthfully about the state of our world. To say, for instance, that the Bible and the Quran both contain mountains of life-destroying gibberish is antithetical to tolerance as moderates currently conceive it. But we can no longer afford the luxury of such political correctness. We must finally recognize the price we are paying to maintain the iconography of our ignorance. Harris's solution is to eliminate biblical religion, because the degree to which religious ideas still determine government policies, especially those of the United States, presents a grave danger to everyone. Atheist wisdom versus the good book. A single death is a tragedy. A million deaths is a statistic. Joseph Stalin. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear ye not, therefore. Ye are of more value than many sparrows. Matthew, chapter 10, verses 29 to 31. The Bible in American History, Part 1. The Bible is worth all other books which have ever been printed. Patrick Henry. It is impossible to rightly govern the world without God and Bible. George Washington. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. So great is my veneration of the Bible that the earlier my children begin to read, the more confident will be my hope that they will prove useful citizens in their country and respectful members of society. John Adams. Religion, the greatest danger to world peace? Think again. Harris's basic arguments are hardly original, but they have an unfortunate pedigree. For more than 300 years, from the French philosophes to Marx, Lenin, and the death of God theologies of the 1960s, we have been assured that, freed from the superstitions and imbecilities of organized religion, rational secularists could make the world into a utopia. The results have invariably been horrific, from the terror of the French Revolution to the terrors of Nazism and communism. Contrary to what anti-religious zealots such as Harris assert, throughout history far more lives have been snuffed out by faith-hating fanatics than by religious believers. Historical demographers estimate that, in the 350 years between 1478 and 1834, the Spanish Inquisition was responsible for the execution of between 2,000, Encyclopedia Britannica, and 32,000 people. Paul Johnson, A History of the Jews, 1987. That works out to about 97 people a year, a ghastly number, to be sure, but a far cry from the millions routinely cited by secular fundamentalists. As for the witch hunts, another example Harris and others give of irrational religious fanaticism, the British historian Norman Davies estimates 50,000 people, primarily women, were executed as witches over a 400-year period, an average of about 125 a year. Yet as horrible as these examples of religious intolerance may be, they pale in comparison with the single-minded, bloodthirsty, satanic fury unleashed upon the innocent by secular fundamentalists, those militantly atheistic regimes that sought to expunge religion from society altogether, and which, like Harris, claimed that religious belief and bourgeois morality represented intolerable obstacles to social progress. According to research conducted by the political scientist Rudolf Rummel at the University of Hawaii, the officially atheist states of the communist bloc committed more acts of genocide than any societies in history. The total number of people murdered by their own anti-Christian governments in the 20th century, communist, socialist, fascist, equals about 170 million. USSR, 61 million people murdered 1917 through 1987. Communist China, 35.2 million people murdered 1949 to present. Mao's army, 3.4 million people murdered 1923 to 1949. Nazi Germany, 20 million people murdered 1932 to 1945. Communist Poland, 1.6 million people murdered 1945 to 1948. Communist Cambodia, 2 million people murdered 1975 to 1979. Communist Vietnam, 1.6 million people murdered 1945 to 1975. Communist Yugoslavia, 1 million people murdered 1944 to 1987. Anti-Christian Mexican Revolution, 1.4 million people murdered 1900 to 1920. Turkey, 1.8 million people murdered 1900 to 1918. Pakistan, 1.5 million people murdered 1958 to 1987. Japan, 5.9 million people murdered 1936 to 1945. And these numbers don't even include the people killed in the wars initiated by these officially anti-Christian states, such as the estimated 25 million soldiers killed in World War II. These are the people lined up against brick walls and shot, often for the crime of merely believing in God, by the rational, more scientific social planners of communist Russia and China, or anti-Christian Mexico and Germany. Rummel's conclusion is as shocking as it is inescapable. War wasn't the most deadly evil to afflict humanity in the 20th century. Government was. And not just any government, but atheist government. As a result, ordinary people, whether religious or not, might be forgiven their general skepticism when today's secular fundamentalists talk about the intolerance and violence of biblical religion, or the people who believe in it. In terms of raw numbers, which is the only kind of evidence that rationalists such as Harris claim to accept, the evidence is incontrovertible. Freed of any moral restraint, believing that the ends justify the means, scoffing at the notion that they will ever answer to a power higher than themselves, the murderous dictators of atheistic regimes feel little hesitation in committing mass murder if they believe it will advance their more rational, more scientific social aims. Christopher Hitchens, in his book God is Not Great, lamely tries to deflect atheism's contribution to global genocide by insisting that all tyrannies are really theocratic, and in any event, Christianity, he says, didn't do enough to stop fascism and Stalinism. As for Richard Dawkins, he is only slightly more candid. In The God Delusion, he concedes that Hitler was ferociously anti-Christian and that Stalin, Mao, and the other communist tyrants were dogmatic atheists. He agrees that they were among the greatest mass murderers in history. But, he says, the difference between religious people who kill and atheists who kill is that there is not the smallest evidence that atheism per se influences people to do bad things. Dawkins adds, individual atheists may do evil things, but they don't do evil things in the name of atheism. But didn't the atheist dictators of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries kill priests, nuns, monks, and believers? Did they not kill in the name of science, rational state planning, and revolutionary morality? A book atheists want to burn. The Black Book of Communism, by Stephen Courtois. Cambridge, Harvard University Press, 1999. This Black Book of Communism tallies up all of the horrors caused by the atheistic communist states of the 20th century. If God is dead, indeed it was their arrogant belief in the absolute power of the state, in direct opposition to the teaching of the Bible, that led to the horrors of their regimes. It was precisely atheism's teachings that there are no bourgeois moral limits, no moral limits whatsoever, that allowed atheistic states to commit mass murder in the name of a higher cause. As Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor put it, if God is dead, all things are permitted. Most Americans, and all believing Jews and Christians, believe that there are moral limits, that all things are not permitted. Some are sinful, some are evil, and we should put our trust not in an all-powerful government, but in an all-powerful God who is himself concerned with our morality and has, in fact, revealed standards of right and wrong. We can only gasp in wonder at the wholesale historical ignorance displayed by contemporary secular fundamentalists, their utter lack of knowledge about events as recent as the fall of the Berlin Wall, when they start prattling on about how much more rational atheists are and how much more moral their social policies would be, freed from the superstitious morality of biblical religion. A century of first-hand, bloody experience with rational atheism has proven that it is atheism, not the Bible or religious belief, that is the greatest danger to world peace.